And I would like to give each and every one a very warm welcome to the meeting tonight. And if it's your first time with us this weekend, we give you a very warm welcome. Also a note of thanks to the saints who have provided this conference, and I'm sure on behalf of all the visitors, we are most thankful. I'd like to read 3 verses tonight from the Bible. First of all, in the book of Exodus in chapter 32. The book of Exodus in chapter 32. Exodus 32 and verse 21. And Moses said unto Aaron, What did this people unto thee, that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And I want you to think of that phrase tonight, so great a sin. Now, the second reading is in the Epistle to the Hebrews, and we're going to read in chapter 2. The Epistle to the Hebrews and chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 3. How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation? And I want you to think of that phrase tonight. So great salvation. Now, a final reading in Luke's Gospel, chapter 16. The Gospel according to Luke in chapter 16. And we're going to read verse 26. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed. And we're going to think of the phrase, so great a gulf. And we're sure tonight the Lord will bless to us the reading from his good word. Now, in Exodus chapter 32, we have read about so great sin. Hebrews chapter 2, so great salvation. And then Luke chapter 16, so great a gulf. So we're going to speak tonight about sin. Then we'll speak about salvation. And then we'll speak about separation. Now let's think tonight about sin. First thing I'm going to say about sin is this. The question might be asked, what is sin? And as you and I read the Bible, we're told time and again what sin is. Listen tonight to what the Bible says about sin. The Bible says this about sin. Sin is a transgression of the law. The Bible says this about sin. He that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And the Bible, time and again, brings before us what sin is. The Bible says this. The thought of foolishness is sin. So the first thing we emphasize about sin tonight is this. The Bible makes it very clear what sin is. Now, secondly, as you and I read the Bible, we discover this. Not only what sin is, But the Bible brings before us what sin does. And one of the things that sin does is this. Remember, sin separates us from God. There's a verse in Isaiah 59, is it? Your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sin has hid his face from you. The hymn writer caught the thought when he penned those words. When sin first lifted its deadly head, made a widening span between the man that walked with God and God that made the man, the sense of sin brought sense of shame, the naked sought to hide. Instead of fellowship and peace, there came the great divide. And the Bible makes it very clear that sin has separated man from God. Come again. Sin in the Bible is likened to many things. And I'm going to speak tonight very quickly about 3 things that sin is likened to. First of all, sin is the master. Sin is not the servant. Remember, sin is the master. And remember tonight, sin is a very cruel master. Secondly, sin is likened to a burden. And remember, it's a very, very heavy burden. And then thirdly, sin is likened to a disease. And it's likened to a very dreadful disease. Now, what does sin do? Sin does this. Sin makes an individual unclean in the sight of God, unprofitable in the service of God, unfit for the presence of God, and puts an individual under the wrath and the judgment of God. Now, sin as a master. Listen tonight to what the Bible says. The wages of sin is death. The Bible says this. Lust, when it is conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. And the Bible makes it very clear. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. Sin as a master. But you know, sin as a burden. Way back in Psalm 38, I read a verse like this. David's the speaker. Listen to what he says. Mine iniquity has gone over my head as a heavy burden. They are far too heavy for me. Sin as a burden. Let me stop tonight and ask the question. What's the most dreadful disease that you know? I remember listening to a missionary, known to some here tonight, Brother Jack Noble. Was a missionary in Antigua. I listened to that man 50 years ago preach the gospel, and he preached on leprosy. And I'll never forget that message. And if he brought before us one thing that night, it was this. Leprosy is a very dreadful disease. The time that man was finished, he said this. Leprosy is a disease that can affect every member of your body. And leprosy tonight is a dreadful disease. What about cancer? Raging the country. And cancer tonight is a very dreadful disease. But I want to remind this audience this evening, if tonight you're still in your sin, you have a disease that is worse than leprosy. And you have a disease that is worse than cancer. And that disease tonight is sin. What do we sing with the boys and the girls? The worst of all diseases is like compared to sin. On every side it seizes, and it rages most within. 'Tis dropsy, palsy, fever, and leprosy combined. None but the believer relief from it can find. And remember, the Bible talks about so great sin. But I want to come to my second verse tonight very quickly. I want to notice three things tonight about this gospel verse. Listen tonight to the three things. Salvation, so great. Neglect, so easy. Escape,